Hello, everyone. Welcome to Artificial Intelligence in Life Sciences, organized by TransPerfect Data Force in collaboration with TransPerfect Life Sciences. I'm Alex Poulis, Senior Director of Artificial Intelligence at TransPerfect, and I'll be your host today. If you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box, as we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Now, with no further ado, I'll let our guests introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Gati Dharani. I'm part of Pfizer's Digital Innovation Lab. I'm looking forward to speaking to you all about AI use cases in the pharma industry.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Mimi Fenton. I'm an Executive Director in Real World Evidence and Late Phase at Syneos Health. I'm an epidemiologist by training, with experience in the use of AI, machine learning, natural language processing in real-world data to provide insights into real-world evidence to improve patient lives. Really looking forward to being here with our panel to discuss this topic.
Hi, everyone. This is Enrico Santos. I am a senior data scientist at Bayer, and my expertise is in natural language processing and deep learning. And I've been working in information extraction for years at MIT. And so today I'm very excited to speak with my colleagues.
Hi, my name is Amir Tamasebi. I'm the Senior Director of Machine Learning AI at CodaMetrix in Boston. My background is image processing and natural language processing, and excited to be a part of the panel.
Antonella?
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Antonella Santuccione Chada. I am located in Switzerland. I wear two hats. One, it is with the biotech Biogen, where I'm head of stakeholder engagement for the Alzheimer's disease ecosystem. And my pro bono hat, it is working as the CEO and co-founder of the Women's Brain Project. This is an organization which is generating evidences and advocating for understanding sex and gender influence on brain and mental diseases. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Gamerman. I'm the head of U.S. Health Informatics and Analytics, part of the medicine organization at Boehringer Ingelheim. I lead a team of experts to optimize clinical trial drug development by harnessing multidimensional real-world data to help meet patient needs through the use of a lot of advanced analytics, such as AI, a topic very close to my heart. Really excited to be here, and again, really excited to contribute how real-world evidence and real-world data can share and help patients' lives.
Hi, I'm Adeka Kumar. I'm part of Applied Technology Innovation Group at Novartis. I'm a product manager and currently leading one of the flagship AI products called Adverse Event Brain. So my role is just not looking at the implementation aspects, but also looking at the operational and the risk management aspects above other things as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Adeka, and everyone for joining the panel today. We're very excited about this conversation. So let's start with our first question for you. What is the difference between traditional medicine and AI-powered medicine?
Okay. Maybe I'll take a first pass at that.
Okay.
So I think in traditional healthcare, our approach is a little bit different than when we might consider using some of these advanced technologies. We're not looking to gather all of the data that's available. Instead, we're more hypothesis driven, right? So in traditional medicine, and in life sciences research, we really gather data that's specific to be able to address a hypothesis that we have, a question that we have. When you look at AI-powered medicine, you're actually looking to take advantage of a plethora, a large volume of data, or maybe to some extent smart databases, smart data sets collected for some specific reasons, and really then be able to generate hypotheses, generate interesting insights that you couldn't otherwise necessarily see just by combing the data from maybe that initial perspective. And then on top of that, of course, layer our medical and subject matter area expertise insights.
Sure. I can build on that a little bit actually as well. So I agree with everything Victoria said, and I think if we're thinking about traditional medicine and the traditional pharmaceutical process, you know, we we have a drug development system that has been fairly slow to adopt technology, especially in relation to perhaps other industries which may have adopted technology a little bit faster. And we have a traditional situation where it's taking billions of dollars and a decade or longer to get a drug to market. And I think that AI is really giving us a power to reduce costs and improve timelines, and to be able to leverage existing data alongside the advanced analytics to gain insights that were not necessarily available before. So before, we would really traditionally have to go to the patient and collect all the data every time that we wanted to make any kind of insight. Advanced analytics and the availability of data allows us to take that piece out to some extent and to find economies and efficiencies that we didn't necessarily have before. And we can see that there are a lot of case studies now, and more with a regulatory environment that is open to this type of approach, where we are seeing drugs approved using just data, and really with reduced timelines and with reduced costs. So I think those are the exciting pieces.
I'd like to look at this also from the perspective of the patient. And now there is a change of paradigm under that perspective. There is a value-based healthcare that is coming in, especially in the US. And it's an healthcare where not only you optimize you make all the process more efficient through data-driven decisions, but also you improve the outcomes. And you can improve the outcomes by preventing rather than treating. And when you prevent, you can just realize whether a person is going to have, let's say, cancer in the next 5 years. And if it's likely to have cancer in the next 5 years, you can monitor. And you monitor in a much more efficient way. And so that's the benefit that the patient may have. On top of this, you have early detection. So the treatment that the patient requires is definitely a easier treatment compared to a late detection. And there is another aspect that is very interesting also on the treatment perspective, is that so far we have been working with a kind of one-fit-all treatment aspect, but we may start going towards a tailored treatment, so through precision medicine.
So if I may, I heard the word prevention, I heard the whole word early diagnosis, and I heard the word precision medicine. So for me, what it is traditional medicine, being myself a medical doctor, it is, for instance, the pandemic. Pandemic, it is nothing else than traditional medicine. It's the chaos we are living. And it seems, in my opinion, that there is still a long way to go to manage those complex and multifaceted events like the pandemic we are living. And as Enrico said, the medicine of the future, it is precision medicine, but still has to be. And I have to say, this is a critic that I'm doing to the whole ecosystem. I was, as a medical doctor and as a person in the drug development industry.
I would like also to add another angle to this, and that's about like, oh, sorry.
Quite disappointed to see that AI did not. I want to finish saying that we didn't witness that AI miracle we were expecting in managing the pandemic, and it's just a critic. You might challenge me back.
Thank you, Antonella. I think we are having some issues with your sound, so you were a little bit choppy. You may want to take a look at that. In the meantime, Amir, I think you were ready to answer that question as well. So just for those who just joined, as we have some attendees who just joined our panel, the question was, what is the difference between traditional medicine and AI-powered medicine? And we have heard everyone's answers. 3 key words that were mentioned are obviously big data, leveraging massive amounts of data, then early detection, prediction, and a 4th keyword was tailored treatment. Amir, we are really excited to hear your inputs.
Sure. So what I was going to mention is another aspect that the AI has kind of touched in many domains, healthcare included, and that's sometimes breaking the boundaries of the tradition. So in medicine is the traditional medicine. And one of the very interesting examples, because AI is empowered to look at subtle differences in the data that may not be very studied with the human power. The example I was going to refer to is the Google's work on the retina imaging, that they have shown very promising results in determining the diagnosis with respect to blood pressure, which because of the subtle differences, it never occurred in traditional medicine to look at that kind of modality for such purpose. So that looks quite promising as well, I would say.
I would like to add, and I think we covered the precision medicine and the treatment plans. I think one of the other things we want to look at is the adherence. So that's part of the medicine aspect, to making sure that people actually follow the medication as they're prescribed. So adherence is also a key part, which AI sort of enables, depending on what your responses are. So like a lot of mobile-based applications are out there today that kind of get your responses, and you can, I think, based on the mining of that data, based on AI, it can detect whether you're adhering it to it, and relaying that information back to the medical professionals to kind of take further action. So that, I would say, is one of the key things. And if you look at Novartis, one of the digital therapeutics like Pear actually got certified as one of the drugs. So that's I think a key difference between traditional and AI powered medicine.
Thanks, everyone. So a follow-up question to this would be, what is the top challenge in your area that AI is trying to address? Where's the area where you're trying to focus now?
Sure, I can start with that. I would say that a massive one, being in real world data, is understanding how we can take the goldmine of patient notes and turn that into structured regulatory grade evidence. So that is really a massive undertaking that a lot of companies are working with, and at Syneos Health we're working on trying to provide solutions for those types of things, where you can take patient notes and turn them into systematic outcomes that can provide rigid evidence that can even be taken on a regulatory grade. So I think that that's one of the really exciting pieces, and using natural language processing to be able to do that. And then also understanding how you can move away from traditional statistical methods, which involve identifying parameters in order to find power in the data, and moving more towards a machine learning approach to generate the hypotheses. So using all the data that is available and really trying to maximize the power of that. And I think that the second one is, it's taken a little bit longer for it to adopt, because there are definitely issues and things surrounding it, but I do see the field moving in that way to think about how we can use machine learning to better understand patient outcomes.
Maybe just to add on to what Mimi said, I think those are really excellent points. And being a trained statistician, I think the other area where I see some challenges in the adoption comes also with the explainability issue. So using your traditional statistics, people are comfortable with that. If I think about how long it took the industry to accept the concept of Bayesian statistics and what it means to have priors and to make that tangible, that has taken some time. So now when you add this machine learning layer, the explainability and the sense to which any of the insights generated really are aligned with what one might expect versus something new versus something that might be totally out of left field, the ability to be able to address a specific question and be able to explain how the numbers do that, as opposed to boom, you press a button and poof, out comes the answer, and that black box algorithm. I think there's a layer there that if we could break through that, or at least start at the layer of what is explainable and how we get those explanations, that could really continue to drive this adoption forward.
Yeah. And I think just on, sorry.
Right.
Yeah, so I think just because it's interesting on the explainability aspect that Victoria mentioned, we are working on a use case which is around adverse event detection on unstructured data. And there too, we have very low fault tolerance, because the idea is not to just give a result out, but how reliable the result is. And the fact that it impacts patient safety, we have to be really, really careful. So explainability is a key part, but I think one of the things is you can also take a phase-wise approach there, where it could be a mix of like the ML piece, but also some of the traditional techniques that could mitigate that risk where the unknowns are there and the algorithm is not completely explainable. So that's where the risk management aspect would also come into play when you talk about AI solutions. And that's something that needs to be actively looked upon when you really want to make those productions in the life sciences area operational and running in production effectively.
No, that's great. And I think to your point around use cases, I think one of the things that we struggle with in pharma from a challenge standpoint is, defining use cases for AI. So right now, it's more of a conceptual, neat tech idea. And we've seen broad applications of AI in our early drug discovery phases, where we're able to kind of identify novel targets, and where the insights that we're getting are tangible data sets. Their AI can be applied, with less conceptual hurdle. But then when we get into kind of the real world environment, how do we utilize AI in terms of like data that we're receiving from patients, data we're receiving both in unstructured and structured ways from physicians, from EMRs? How do we actually take that information and apply AI capability to it to derive insights? I think that's a hurdle, Victoria, to your point, that we're still coming up against in the industry.
So if I may, my comment, and I hope you can hear me better now, is that one of the challenges that we have, nevertheless, still, it is on the data set. I mean, as far as I've understood, data sets are really fundamental to address the right question, generate the hypothesis, and provide a possible answer. And what we do at the Women's Brain Project, for example, we make the scientific community aware of possible biases within data set, and we try to advocate, such as there is a mitigation strategy in place within algorithms, such as the bias can be waived. We are not saying that we have to remove all the biases of the world, because it is impossible. We live in a biased planet. And the point is, we need to be aware of such biases. We need to know they exist, and we need to mitigate the risk that if the solution generated by the data cannot be applied to a certain type of people, to a certain type of patients, we know about it, which means might be that the solution is better designed for men rather than women and the other way around, but we need to be aware of this. And yeah, this is my contribution. So it's your role as experts in developing coding and all this to solve this issue.
Just adding on top of that, thanks, Antonella, I think that's quite important. I feel like now it's time for AI to kind of step up and really be used in action. There's so much good news about the performance and outperformance of AI-based technology, but once we start testing it in, let's say, in the imaging or NLP space with the data that is not really similar to the training set, we see the scalability starts to look shaky. I think that's the point that AI starts to look a bit in a way that we need more work in that space to be able to scale up and to be able to use it beyond what the data has been trained on, basically.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on this and give a little bit of numbers. So natural language processing has been mentioned before. Is definitely a discipline that may help the healthcare pretty much. If we think that doctors spend about 50% of their time to write the EHR notes, and it has been demonstrated in some recent studies that about 65% of the times doctors are unable to read those notes before the visits, meaning that the EHRs contain a lot of important information about the patient that can help, in fact, the prevention, the diagnosis, the treatment, and so on. But no one is utilizing this information. So definitely, we're talking about millions of pieces of information that are sitting there for the benefit of no one. So it's crucial, this also for what concerns the retrospective studies. When you try to understand something about, let's say breast cancer, which is a field in which I worked, you try to understand breast cancer. What we are doing nowadays is looking at 200-300 cases, while you can actually rely on thousands and thousands and thousands of cases, and you would have a very much higher resolution picture of the phenomenon to understand. So we could advance much faster into the understanding of this kind of diseases, clinical diseases. And this is the challenge in NLP, considering that it's a huge challenge in NLP, considering that 80% of the data so far is unstructured. So it's in the form of free text, and so the pieces of information are buried into it.
Yeah, but you know, Amir, to that point, there's tremendous value in the unstructured data, and I think that that's where we're trying to push the envelope. You know, when you think about, you know, the patient journey, and you think about, you know, friction points that the patient comes up against in their management of disease, a lot of that rich information is contained in physician notes. It's contained in lab data that potentially may not make it into, let's say, a structured format. So that's really somewhere I think we are pushing forward so that we can derive that. I can give an example. We have a product in a highly competitive therapeutic area where packaging was a huge issue for adherence. So the way that they would receive the product, I see Victoria nodding, I think it's a competitive product, where I used to be as well. So we learned that, you know, in a hospital setting, the way that they were receiving product was in a different format, and then once at discharge, they were receiving product with a different number of pills packaged in a different way. So we realized just through AI and running some models around patient surveys that there were issues around adherence leading directly from packaging. So we were able to resolve that quickly. So there's a huge amount of value in that unstructured data. I think we just need to figure out how we can do that. And I think one big learning, and this panel represents it in a great way, is that we need to work cross industry, cross partnership. We need companies like Syneos and others that have that data capability that perhaps we don't have in-house yet at firms like Pfizer.
And if I can put my epidemiology hat on for a moment, I totally agree with everything that you say, Gati, with the unstructured data and the value, and how that's really where we can get these deep, rich clinical insights that we just don't have in the structured data. But the epidemiologist in me is kind of saying, like, we need to hold on a minute. And especially when it comes to missingness. So missingness in the unstructured notes is so important to consider, because the absence of information doesn't mean the absence of a clinical sign or a clinical symptom. It just might mean that the physician didn't administer the test, or maybe they did administer the test or the exam and didn't record it. So I think that we have really good sensitivity in the unstructured data, but I think that in terms of specificity, it's something that we still need to work out. And one of the solutions that we're thinking about and working on is, you know, how can we then use prospective data collection to top up that information? And that is one potential approach. But Adeka, to your point about using the unstructured information for adverse event testing, that's also something to think about, that if something was, you know, not super severe or not on the physician radar, or not even tested in a systematic way, you know, you hear about people having, you know, strokes and heart attacks that don't even get reported because they're so minor that they didn't realize, or maybe they don't have access to their physician if they're in a rural area and the physician is hours away. So I think that the unstructured data is phenomenal, and it really is going to be the way forward, and it's going to give us the insights that we weren't able to get, but we have to set standards as a community for how to use those things.
Yeah, so I think just on that point, right? So one is, I think the key thing is to ask the right questions. So though we have the data, it's also the equal stress has to be put on what questions are we asking of that data, because then that will really identify what the gaps are. And I think the other aspect when we talk about model training, which is also something that really needs to be looked at, and one of the key things when we looked at our product was what concepts you're using to train the algorithm on. Is it the business definition as is, or you are changing or morphing it so that it addresses some of the the gaps that Mimi you were mentioning, right? That they just the absence of something doesn't indicate that it is not there, right? So how do you cover for those kind of scenarios, especially where patient safety or it impacts patient directly, is one of the key things that needs to be looked at when we talk about algorithm training.
Maybe
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Victoria.
So I was just going to add, I think, a related point to sort of maybe summarize all of this, and we can also talk about any other questions you had next, Alex. But I think it's starting with the right question and defining that well, but then it's also about making sure that you have the right quality of data to the point Mimi was mentioning earlier, that and you can leverage whatever is the right then data source and make sure that it's fit for purpose data. And I think that is a key aspect that really pulls it all together. So just a quick comment there, Alex.
Thank you, Victoria, for summarizing this for me. You made my job much easier. Okay, we heard a lot about unstructured data, explainability, bias in the data, missingness, I believe was the term you used, Mimi. So the need, the fact that missing some data doesn't mean that we are also missing the symptoms in patient notes, and asking the right questions. So let's start with the unstructured data, which seems to be one of the major concerns here. And my next question is, what is the state of the art in technology that deals with unstructured data in your teams and organizations? And what would be your advice to someone who is starting their journey in that area, who is starting to deal with the unstructured data? So it's a question with two parts. The first one is, what is the state of the art in the technology and how we measure that? And the second part is, what would be your advice to someone who's starting their journey?
So I can take a stab at it to start with. So I think when we talk about what is the state of the art technology, I don't think it's one solution fits all, which kind of we started off the session with. So depending on what data it is, because unstructured data, even if you surprise across channels, whether you take maybe call notes or you take free social media data, or you take transcribed call center calls, the data would look very different, or email content will look very different, right? So depending on what that data is, where it's coming from and who is capturing it, so the source, that will determine what technology or what algorithm or what state of the art would really apply there. I think so far, obviously, we talk a lot about natural language processing, deep learning for unstructured data, but it could be, again, depending on the data, it could be something which is more, a semantic technology, search technology that you could use, So it's, I don't think so we can say one shot. And I think the other part is when, when somebody is starting out, I think it's very important to look at the data and understand where it's coming from, to then determine what that solution should entail. So just going for the coolest and the latest will probably not be the right way approach.
Maybe I can also add to that about natural language processing. So you asked about state of the art. It was about 2018 that the language model made a huge jump in progress, and BERT was given birth. And I think that made a very big difference in all the NLP tooling and the technology around it. So as Adeka mentioned, the beginning looked very promising, but then we realized it's like start teaching a person how to read and understand radiology reports per se. That's as an example. The first thing is you teach the person to speak English as the language, or any other language the report is written on. And then after that, to be good at understanding the this domain-specific concepts. So the BERT language model that they came out, they were first trained on news articles or general publicly available data, but to use it for the healthcare purpose, of course, we saw not very promising results. That's where we needed the fine-tuning piece to come into play and then adopt it for a specific application. And that, let's say, for radiology reports, a BERT for radiology, for pathology, different structure, different wording. So that's where I think the place still there to improve and kind of show. And as to my previous point, scalability. With all due respect with the radiologists and pathologists in this meeting, it's quite challenging. They use different language, different abbreviations from different clinical sites, and to be able to build something that is robust and scalable, it's still a lot of room for improvement, I would say.
Yeah, I'd like to connect to what Amir is saying, because actually we have worked with Amir in some projects between MIT and Philips to extract information from unstructured data, and we have explored several models, and it was very interesting. Rather than speaking about suggestion about what to do, I'd like to speak about the suggestion about what not to do. One error that I see very often in the industry is to fall into the hype trap. The hype trap, like GPT-3. I mean, when GPT-3 came out, there were a lot of wonderful demos, and for months, for like a couple of months, there were like all these demos, and all the industry was so excited, and it seemed like the NLP problem was solved forever. Of course, this was not the case. As Amir was saying, GPT-3, similarly to BERT, is a language model, so they teach like to the model to predict the next word or some words into the sentence, so the model learns somehow English. But this doesn't mean that this is applicable to any kind of task. And the demos are always made to impress, not to actually tell you how good this is.
Yeah, I think that's super right. And going back to what Adeka, I really enjoyed what you said, and I thought it was really important. And I'd like to kind of throw a term out there that I think is really critical here, which is fit for purpose. So, you know, in my prior role, I was a director of real-world evidence at Sanofi, and I cannot tell you how many vendors would be contacting me on a daily basis, just cold calling me with emails like, we have the state-of-the-art technology, we have the best data, we have everything. And what happens as soon as you start investing in something like that is that, you know, you run the risk of every problem being just kind of this nail, and you've got this really expensive hammer, and you're just trying to hit every nail with this hammer just because you want to get the return on investment. And so I think you really need to think about a fit for purpose approach where you are thinking very thoughtfully, like Victoria emphasizes, about the specific research question and how you can find the best methods possible to address the question. At Syneos, we have an approach called dynamic assembly, where we work with you know, various different folk who our technology and data people find that may have the latest and the greatest technology, and they kind of go through that vetting process, but there's no real investment in that in terms of purchasing, because these things are moving so quickly that, you know, as soon as you invest in something, it's already outdated. So I think we have to really be aware of that. And Alex, to your point about how to start, I think with something like this, you need to start with a pilot project. I think that to launch right into a big study, fresh off the bat, saying, hey, I want to get an AI, it can be a little bit much. But I think that what's really tangible, and this is something we did at Sanofi when we were starting to introduce machine learning, is that we would start with smaller pilot projects, see how those went, and then think about, okay, how can we scale those up? And it's a series of scaling, not one to the other. So I think that's one approach.
It's more like a drug development process, right? So it goes through various phases. It's not even two-phase. I think it's like, I mean, you know, going through the journey that we've gone through, it's almost like a, you know, multi-year journey that you would take on, because as you know, the data would change while you get to the next step, right? So how do you adapt? So it's like you keep moving, but then everything, the data is also changing, right? You know, so that's one thing that we need to take that into consideration as well.
And we've also done this approach of trying to do sort of what I would call maybe like a proof of concept with some of these applications. And I think to me the organization has to kind of go through the struggles alongside the team doing the work and executing on it. You have all the challenges in addition to the points already brought up, but maybe you can categorize them as data wrangling, right, as a very common term. When Amir, you were talking about the ontology, this to me also brings to mind the common data model, right? In clinical trials, we have ADAM, SDTM, CDISC standards. What do we do for other data sources, and how would we take a model that we create on a single data source on a particular aspect of it and make it scalable, to your point, such that we can use and reuse some of these things. And then also the organizations, I think, really need to learn about how to scale the right IT infrastructure. What kind of things can you do on premise? What kind of things do you need to do with some sort of cloud solution when you have these models that are running that are more powerful, but they're also taking and aggregating insights and data from different places potentially. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to start with something that is small, that's concrete, that can be delivered, but also through that experience be able to capture for their organization an understanding of what blocks and barriers we're going to come across in order to really make it truly scaled across maybe different therapeutic areas or other, to be able to answer questions more broadly than that specific one. Because if every time you answer a specific question, you have to learn about the new data source, you have to figure out the cloud solution or on-premise solution to do it, figure out the ontology, manage the data, every single problem you try to solve is going to take so much time, it really won't be sustainable.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Victoria, I know we don't want to just keep hammering on the challenges or the blocks, but when we think about AI models that are applicable to a consumer marketplace or a consumer environment, when you apply that to pharma, there's several, patient privacy, HIPAA compliance type, hurdles that we find. So when I talked earlier about partners and creating partnerships that can allow us to expand on capabilities perhaps we don't have in-house, that's a key one, right? From a feasibility standpoint, that they have that know-how around data privacy, they have that know-how around, how to treat sensitive patient data, even if it is in aggregate form, it still allows a lot of risk to come through, particularly with like AI reporting, AE reporting, and things of that nature. So that's a key consideration.
Yeah.
So this brings me to, I would
go
have
ahead.
a question around here. I mean, the first question I have, being, as I said, practicing medicine myself for a long time and being also in assessing drugs, working for regulators. So based on all these type of discussions, the data privacy, but also the data owning, I mean, how do you see the empowerment of the patients in this whole process? Because at the end of the day, we are empowering drug developers or AI developers with data, which in the end belongs to us, the patients, and we are letting them to provide solutions that we have to pay for it though. So I see a little bit of a paradox here, and I don't see also a discussion ongoing about this topic yet. And this worries me because I'm always wondering, yeah, but any comment on this?
Yeah. I mean, I think if we look at right now with what we're doing here, we're taking social media data, for example, which is publicly available data for identifying potential AEs. Now, but we do also have to take into consideration the GDPR aspect, right? So that's part of that is the solutions that we are looking at, and that's where the whole compliance or the validation aspect comes in from the from the regulatory authorities, because how are you using that data, and then also determine which kind of rule, which kind of regulation takes precedence, because you have a patient safety regulation, but then you also have the GDPR requirements which are around. So how do you balance the two? And these are, I don't think so these are discussions already kind of sorted out, but they have already started to happen. So in multiple areas, where as we talked about, the cross-industry collaboration is starting to happen there, that how do you tackle them, how do you address the data privacy aspect. So it's not that it's not into consideration. It's just that I don't think there is a one short answer there yet. And then like when we talk about even like where you're using digital therapeutics, it's about getting the patient consent, whether we can use that data for further mining or not. So if it is not there, then we're not able to mine that data to maybe even do like
yes,
adversarial detection.
But the consent doesn't solve the problem of who is owning the data and how are we rewarding patients for providing their data on which we do develop our asset. And that's the problem that I see in the missing conversation around it. So in the future medicine, the world to be speaking about how we'll be moving from traditional medicine towards a new type of medicine, I envision the fact that we value the contribution of patients in terms of providing data and making sense out of the data and getting a return. Whether it's about health points, we give digital bitcoins, I don't know, you are the experts, but I think that this is a problem which has to be fixed.
And a great initiative that is ongoing related to taking this more what I would call broad stroke, this more patient-centric approach is what the FDA is doing right now with their patient-focused drug development, PFDD. And I think they're really putting it out there on the importance of even getting patients involved at the time that you're developing your clinical program and really getting that perspective in. So it's not so much just focused on who owns the data. I think there's a lot, even though we have patients who consent, for example, if we wanted to use the data for another purpose, we have to go back and recheck the consent and make sure that in that consent, we can, in fact, according to the terms, still use that data. So I think there's a starting point to that dialogue, but because there's no single ownership, there's it really will take a cross-industry, multi-stakeholder approach to truly address that question. There's no natural driver or owner other than maybe the patient themselves and us being our own representatives of patients within our own systems.
And I think the way forward is going to be going directly to the patient to get consent. I think that's how we're going to be accessing notes in future. Sorry, I interrupted you, Alex.
No problem at all. Actually, since we have been talking a lot about data and speaking of the solutions and advice on where somebody could start, I think some of the important things that we heard in the last minutes is that we need to avoid the hype trap. We need a fit for purpose approach. There's not a one fits all. We need to start with the right questions, and we need to start with a pilot and then find out a way of scaling that, right? How do we manage our data to scale that pilot? IT infrastructure is very important, and we need to take into account regulatory issues and data privacy. At the same time, so obviously it sounds like we need to be very cautious on how we implement AI and so on. At the same time, there's a lot happening in the research field. And Enrico, I know that you recently published a paper that indicated some improvements using your NLP models and NLP approach. Would you like to tell us about that, and what is the kind of hopes we get out of the results we see in research?
Yeah, let me say something about the question that was before. So, because data governance is a big issue in healthcare, the engineers, of course, are trying to turn around it, play around it. And this is why we are trying, for example, to develop systems like a federated learning that basically try to learn from data that is distributed across institutions. Because one of the major problems that you have in healthcare is that institutions actually own the data. It's not the patient that owns the data. And so if you want to train a model on a multi-institutional data set, you may need to ask every single institution if you can take this data and bring it into a center like a cloud, wherever, where you can do that. But now engineers are coming out with these new algorithms that can basically do some training locally in the various institutions and then merge all these trainings together to perform well on multiple institutions. About the questions that you have asked about the papers that I've recently published, there is one actually with Amir. It's about extracting information from pathology reports or also using this information for some clinical goals. In particular, we published a paper between MIT and Dana-Farber, where we were in a certain sense predicting whether a patient would have benefit from a procedure. And the procedure in this case was the CRT, cardiac resynchronization therapy, which is a procedure where 1/3 of the patients don't benefit at all of it, and some of the patients even die by the complications. So you want to actually understand whether a patient is going to benefit before doing the procedure. And our system could recognize about 25% of the patients that were not going to benefit, with 80% approximately accuracy, which means actually you can save lives.
What was the main change that your approach brought that had that significant effect?
Oh no, it was like predicting instead of applying the procedure and then seeing what the result is, right? And I mean, the prediction was on a data set, on a historical data set. It worked well on a historical data set, and nobody knows whether it will work well in the future. So that's the major concern before applying this kind of procedure. But it can be at least a support for the doctors to take the decision.
And maybe just to add, I think that there's that is an excellent example of where there could be some real opportunities. This ability to create a algorithm-driven tool to support, and I think this is where also digital therapeutics come into play, but something that would support your traditional ability and your traditional medicine. It really, I think these two factors are very complementary to really be able to take our human learned expertise and experience, and on top of that add a ability to make that a smarter decision made, a more data-driven decision made. But you can't really have one in the absence of the other. In order to have a algorithm that is workable, you need that medical expertise, that medical knowledge, that knowledge of, to a point made earlier about how the data was collected and the data source and any possible patterns of missing data that might exist. And you need to pair that with the ability of an algorithm to do something that would allow you to put in the hand of a doctor on their iPhone or an iPad or right integrated into their EMR as they're talking to that patient in real time, something that says flag. This might be of concern based on blah, blah, blah in this federated data model and application. You know, this could be something that you want to pay extra attention to. And if that gets patients to an earlier diagnosis, if it gets us to prevent the number of you know, harmful effects that's on, that really then becomes the benefit that you can demonstrate. But that's, I think what Enrico mentioned is a great example of the partnership and the combination of those approaches.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the use cases that we look at AI, I think we should approach it where you kind of consider a human in the loop rather than, you know, thinking that the human should not be in the loop. It's like, where do you really leverage and how do you kind of maximize on that human intelligence, I think is what really should be the focus. And I think one of the other areas where, you know, this comes into place in telemedicine as well. So because, you know, you know, over the phone, you're not sure if you're capturing all of the elements, but if you have an AI-powered solution in there, you know, some of the nuances could be captured, which could have been missed, and that makes the doctor make, or the nurse practitioner makes better decisions as well. So.
Thank you, everyone. There are so many topics and so little time. How about we go ahead with the questions from our attendees, and then if we have time, we can continue with our conversation. So the first question we have from Gavin is, how can we as a manufacturer understand or better prepare for the requirements of any AI backend? I can repeat the question. How can we as a manufacturer understand or better prepare for the requirements of any AI backend? Does anyone want to give it a try?
So I can maybe take it.
Please go ahead.
Let me take a first pass, and I think you'll probably have a lot to add, Enrico. I guess going back to a point that was made previously, I think when it comes to really being able to know what you need to have on the back end for any AI approach or outcome or tool or whatever would be the end product, I think starting with a pilot with some sort of proof of concept will be the starting point to really know what the limitations are of the existing environment. And I think from there, you'll really be able to have an understanding of what is the full scale of the infrastructure, be a different pathway from a regulatory perspective, depending on what you're going to do and how you're going to implement, for example, software as a medical device with some of these approaches is necessary to consider. And so I think you have to really start with understanding what is your current environment and the bounds or barriers of that. Enrico, maybe I'll pass it to you.
Oh, he changed his mind. He has an audio problem. Okay. Let's continue with
this. Saying a lot of technical problems today, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Great. So shortly, I've been working with several biopharma companies and on the manufacturing side, and they had a lot of pain points. So as much as I agree to work on a pilot study, I agree to decide for the biggest pain points. So you prioritize your pain points and try to address first the biggest one. In my experience, I've been working to predict where some problems with the machines were going to happen, or to somehow feel the information. Sometimes the reports that the machine return are not completely filled. So we wanted to somehow use the correlations between the information that we had and the information that we didn't have to somehow fill this form, such that you could have a better picture of what is happening in the manufacturing pipeline. And yeah, I mean, there are several pain points you may want to address.
Thank you very much. So the next question is asking, do we have we have good enough tools in the industry to convert non-structured data into structured, especially when it comes to OR nodes? NLP currently seems to be at 70 to 83% accuracy, which is not acceptable in the medical realm. All yours.
No, I know that a lot of companies are trying to do a combination. So a lot of companies are feeling that in order to curate the notes, you really do need to use a human. I think that's a controversial point. I see a role of AI really in the curation of the notes, but to go from 78 to 100, you possibly need a human, but a human isn't going to be 100 either. You're going to have issues there as well. So
yeah, I think when we talk about 70 to 80%, it's like if you have to go to the next level, it's again, this is where the mix of the solution could come into play, right? So where you look at standardize some of the existing solutions that are more they're reproducible, or what you can say predictable. We combine it with the AI to kind of reach that high accuracy level that we're looking for. So that could be another way, along with the human aspects, of course.
I was going to also add that one important thing to keep in mind is that these kind of problems requires continuous learning. So you start with let's say 70%, and you start learning where are still the room for improvements and what needs you to address those. Is it a new algorithm? The current algorithm comes short. To Adeka's point, is it like an ensemble approach now that combining different approaches? Is it lack of enough label data to address that specific problem, or there's noise in your data? That's another aspect. There's enough variability in the label data that you have that causes the model to struggle to learn the consistent pattern there. So I think this is all requires a continuous approach to solving these kind of problems.
And I think the next question is more for Antonella. It sounds like it's in your area. Harris is asking, the practice we have seen the least innovation in is mental health. Do you think AI would play a role to this?
I think AI is going to be the solution, if you ask me. at least when it's about understanding patients' symptomatics, understanding progression of the disease, so characterizing really the disease itself. Because in neurological and psychiatry disorder, basically we have the brain that it's manifesting pathology, but the symptoms, they all resemble in any type of disease, and it takes years to basically diagnose a brain pathology. Either it's going to be Alzheimer's disease or schizophrenia. Before you arrive to that final black and white certainty, it takes a long time. So my hope is that using digital biomarkers and digital solution, we will be smarter and faster in characterizing the disease we are observing, in providing a better diagnosis. And where I see even more a more important contribution from AI-based solutions, it is the readout of clinical endpoints. Because if we use scales as it is today, which are assessing behavior and cognition, for example, and the performance is assessed by a doctor, it is all prone to bias, to uncertainty, to very poor accuracy, and we might just lose effect of drugs simply because the readout is the wrong one. So if we delegate the readout to a more digitalized solution, if we have this in place, we might really come up with better drug. This goes towards what Enrico mentioned at the beginning, precision medicine, where big data set, where genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, anything, even the social economic status of a patient has to be taken into account, and then you tailor the solution specifically. This is for me the medicine of the future, and that's why I was provocative when we started and the audio was a bit turbulent, and I said for me, traditional medicine, it is the pandemic, because we managed it like we knew, and it's kind of, very empiric attempt. AI didn't make a big difference, unfortunately. I was expecting much more based on the, all the hopes that we are putting into a high-based solution. So it's your job, guys, to really speed it up, make it better, and implement it 360 degrees, and above all, neurology and psychiatry, because this is one of the biggest unmet need.
Yeah, and if
I add to that, because I have some work that I've done on the fMRI in the past. I think one thing is still there is room for improvement is the introduction of new modalities. In fMRI, what we really measure is the proximity of the neural activities, the blood oxygenation level that we measure. It's not directly the neural activity. In EEG, for instance, is the source analysis that we collect from the skull, not really where the signals are coming from the neurons. So I think we need a better modality, better resolution to really be able to capture the data from the source, and then hopefully that can make a breakthrough in the mental health.
Yeah, and just maybe last point to add is, we haven't really talked that much today about conversational AI, but there's a huge opportunity in the mental health space, and we've seen kind of telehealth take a front seat in psychiatric counseling, in therapeutic counseling. So I think that there has been some innovation in that space in terms of like advent of telehealth, but now I think even more with conversational AI, there's a huge role that we can see it playing in the mental health space.
Awesome, thank you so much. So it looks like one of our attendees needs help getting started with their AI journey. So Isabel is asking, what do manufacturers need to have in place before they even consider AI? In my experience with customers, there are not harmonized data sets, not harmonized systems, and different taxonomy and ontologies across systems and teams. What would you say is the minimum foundation you need to get started?
I would say at minimum, a data architecture team in-house, data scientists and biostatisticians on the client side. I think that would make your job a lot easier, and likelihood of success would be higher.
Thank you. I think this is a very good closing question. So I'd love to hear everybody's input if you can in a couple of words. So yeah, Amir, go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe first to look at is it really a problem that requires AI? I think that's the very #1 question you have to look into. Rather than taking a hammer looking for a nail, let's see if it's really like that complicated of a problem that AI is needed.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. Start with the question, not with the method.
Yep, I think if I were to pick something, oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Antika.
So I think the domain experts have to be at the center of it, and you know, when we're looking, so that's one of the key things we need to look at.
I think if we had to pick something that was most important, we've already mentioned, and I think we all probably are on the same page. To Antonella's point earlier, though, I do think we have to keep in mind as we're thinking about what is the question that we're trying to answer and bringing in the expertise to be able to answer that question. You can't forget that the ultimate benefit will be for all of us, for all the patients, and so having that layer of a common intent, I think, is really important as well.
And I'd add that we have to look at the long-term benefits of AI. As it was pointed out before by Amir, it is possible that the system won't work very well in the next couple of months because you don't have enough data, because you will need to tweak a little bit and so on. But if you expect that in the next 2-3 years, you're going to have thousands of data points more, then go with that, because it's going to help you pretty much. And the multidimensionality of AI is something that humans cannot achieve. Humans are unable to look at so many factors. That's why Antonella was mentioning all these many features that we can take advantage of. So yeah.
Okay, I guess that's it then. Thanks a lot, everybody. We are out of time now. Interestingly enough, we still have more than 150 attendees that were willing to stay longer. Thanks, everybody, for participating. Thanks to our audience that connected today, and thanks to our wonderful guests and panelists. Follow TransPerfect Data Force and Life Sciences on social media, because we're going to have some more events like this one. The next one is actually Global Next, which is happening on September 30 at noon Eastern Standard Time. And there we will show you how to efficiently implement artificial intelligence also in other industries. Until then, everyone stay safe and don't forget to innovate. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.